we've got a bunch of good engineers in Australia. We've got fantastic talent. There's a very active community on Telegram. You've got some really good thought leaders, Bocky, etc. And they are very humble, and they will help the community. Like, there's unanswered questions, and they're pretty. They don't expect anything in return. So I think we've got a fantastic community, and there's a hope that momentum of the developers help each other continues. I spoke at a law conference one, and one of the lawyers said, "I don't understand why developers help each other out for free." That was basically their words. It's like, well, I get blocked and I have to reach out. Like, just for a concrete example, I was writing a talk last night and using some Solidity code, and they put out Solidity 5, which had breaking changes. So my code just didn't work. The Solidity documentation is now out of sync. There was one YouTube video I found with 24 views on it. That saved me. So someone had gone to the time, make a video explaining it. I watched it all and learned a bit more about the breaking changes of Solidity 5, and it got me out of jail. So we need to give back to the community. I think Australian developers and generally they're doing a good job of that. So we're pretty well set, for sure.
It's hard for me to answer the dev question in terms of blockchain-wise where we're going. I'll try and pull this back to something that I understand, which is what the financial side of financial services see this going. I think we're all sitting here with the market the way it is now, and I think of a lot of projects here that may not be doing as well as they or we would like to be doing. The one thing that would improve it for all of us is obviously if the market started to rise. The only way for the market to start to rise is money was to come pouring into the system. Where's all the money? There's $70 trillion currently held in assets under management of high net worth individuals, all held by traditional financial services. We talk about what devs are doing. There's been a lot of conversation here about various different projects and what we're doing for individuals, what we're doing for the community. And I don't want to sound like a sellout, but I think for a great development of the ecosystem, we do need to think about what are we developing for the greater financial services industry. I know we see ourselves sitting on the other side of the fence, but if we're not catering towards traditional financial services, which is where all the money is, then to some extent we're always going to be that little younger brother trying to catch up with traditional financial services. For me, custodial services and custodial solutions is a very large part of that answer. That's the question I'm consistently getting asked. Platforms and portals that allow wealth managers and financial advisors to come on board with this ecosystem is one answer. And I'd say the third part of it is stablecoin architecture, or better sort of stable coins, or more sustainable stable coins that are out there. These are the three things I'm just calling upon my experience of working with traditional financial services as the three things that the traditional financial service industry is sort of screaming out for to enable greater mainstream adoption, and as a result boost us as an ecosystem as well. And so I'm going to answer my question with another question, sort of passing it forward to the rest of the panel of what's happening in that sphere, what's happening in that direction perhaps that we can look forward to, or even for me to ask to want the answers to that question to help to quell the fears of the financial services industry that we're not looking into their needs at all.
Well, I'm going to take the opposite side. I'm looking at solutions that are outside the financial framework, but we've had to kind of back our way into it. Our platform is a health-based platform, but you can't get anywhere without either getting research money or paid physicians or paid for services. So we've had to learn a lot about the financial tech, the financial markets, the existing markets, and have had to not necessarily solve the problem of a stable coin, but at least articulate the problem well enough so that we can push it down the line. So we spent a lot of time looking at what the true problems in the world are, and when that was something that somebody simplified for me very easily. The UN states the 17 Sustainability and Development Goals. If you use those as your key market entry points, those are the problems that need to be solved. That's what we've agreed on. So we went after health and well-being, we've looked at finance, we've looked at some clean water and some other health-based initiatives in that space. But for us, with general health and well-being and creating our platform, it gave us that thing to reach for, that star to reach for, and that there is a financial star out there also. So if we can all at least say these are the things that we're trying to solve, and we can come up with common language, we may have an easier time going from philosophical, purposeful solution to actual on-the-ground location that needs that solution to be applied. General health and well-being in this particular region, in this township in Croatia, because they're not close to a hospital, but they still have the technology to get a second opinion on their phone. We've got another group over here that doesn't have internet banking, but now they've got an app that allows them to either convert BCH into some token or Bitcoin and then have a transaction without anything more than a 900 megahertz phone. We can draw those lines from those top level problems through a blockchain solution to people on the ground. And if we, as a tech community, both from the financial side, from the development side, from the architecture side, if we can come up with language that speaks to those entities at the UN level, at the international level, and start thinking internationally in general, across finance, across health, across tech, I think we could get much more synergy. Because I think right now, and I take on board what Katrina said earlier, we've got to stop doing the MVPs. We need to see what the real problems are, and maybe not solve the whole problem with the blockchain. We can't put all of health on the blockchain, right? We can't, but we can do certain things. We can get IDs. We can validate files. We can validate the interaction between a patient and a doctor, and then we can turn that into research data. Those are things we can do with the blockchain. And we're actually focused from problem to solution on the ground.
I agree. I don't think emerging tech really cares about the current financial landscape. This is a financial sector, so it does have to have a little bit of thought of how to onboard people. For the future of blockchain, I have a philosophical and an economic approach, like trying to think of the game theory behind it. There's incentives in this industry, so this is the reason why we're all here. If you think about when in history has the whole world put money together for one specific thing? And you can think of the internet, you can think of going to the moon, which is a little bit of a pun. So it would be wrong for me to say that there's a chance that blockchain will never be here in the future. It's here, and as the market's crashing, the development's still increasing, which could be another point to the question that was put before.
And I think, like, if I was in the financial services industry, I would take this as the onus is kind of on that industry to adapt and to think about problems differently, because the challenge is how do you continue to evolve with a technology that's more interested in getting to the ground and solving those big sustainable development goals. And we're not excluding you, we're just trying to open it up in a new way so that there's more people to be empowered. And the financial services industry should be involved in that conversation, should be brought along for the ride, but only if they're willing to sort of take a look at how they've been doing business. It's not business as usual.
This is the problem, though. We keep reverting back to they should be on them. They should be adapting. They should be changing their minds. But we're the minority. They have no emergent need to have to adapt because of the fact that they've got the vast majority. I have the same argument constantly with the drug law reform movement. Just some of you may know that's something I'm very involved in. And a lot of the drug law reform movement here is still, I went to a drug law reform rally recently and I had to leave because there was a bunch of people walking around Fitzroy Gardens in Melbourne carrying these, I think, dreads. Look like they walked out of Rainbow Surfing Festival, and they're like walking around with these big signs saying, free the weed, free the weed. I'm like, guys, this is not going to help. This is not going to work. And they go, oh, well, we shouldn't need to dress in suits to talk about this if we're talking sense. I'm sorry, you have to. Because as much as the politicians should be adapting their views, they don't need to. And it's a similar sort of thing. The financial incumbents don't need to yet. That's going to change quite rapidly. But in that time, internally. But in that time, what are we doing to try and yes, it sounds like we're pandering to their needs, but perhaps we need a couple of Trojan horses to sort of break in and get in there.
Yeah, Ethereum's a great place to start. Just as mentioned, we've got a great community. There's some other good change which promises everything, but start playing with it and see how well the documentation stacks up, or see when you get blocked where you reach out for support. So we all probably understand Ethereum has problems, but to me it's got the biggest community, which is not to be underestimated. So yeah, definitely start there, but it is rapidly changing, like I mentioned. So you've kind of got to skill up, and for like developers for sure, getting into it. I think you put on Telegram some languages if you are an aspiring developer. So unfortunately, you have to know JavaScript. It's not going away. You can do everything in JavaScript now, which is a whole nother conversation. You should learn, I believe, some pain. So do C++, learn memory management, and then never touch it again.
Don't say that.
Well,
we need C++ devs.
Yeah, but it's true. Like if you get into like Ethereum, you need to know the stack, and you need to know memory management. So there's a bit. JavaScript has syntactics the same and performs the same as Ethereum and Solidity, but you need to know a bit of the memory management stuff as well. I believe you should learn a quick language like Python, because you can knock out stuff pretty quickly. If you want to deploy a contract, you can write a Python script. You don't have to go full OO. And if you like pain, then learn Haskell or something that's fun. Like if you like to do marathons, then do something like Haskell, because it's a complete paradigm shift. So it's like, I guess the analogy is if you learn one language and then something different like Chinese or Mandarin, it helps you focus more on your English. So if you know like functional programming, it really changes your way you think about the world and problems. So even if it's not commercially used, just functional programming in a sense is, I think, should be taught more.
And it's nuanced. The reason we have such a great open source Solidity community is that we don't have extensive documentation, because again, we're in 300 baud modem land. This is not internet. This is way pre-internet signaling and memory stacks and dealing with VMs that don't have standard frameworks that you could really relate to anywhere else. States in blockchain are ridiculously complex to conceive, let alone program to. And if you're trying to get inside the dump truck, which is the VM for me, it's like when you're starting to really get down to the nitty gritty of what you're trying to achieve, you're going to need all of that stack. You're going to need Python, C++, Solidity, and make sure that you're not stepping on any of the toes. So now I'm going to switch it back to more general speak. When we're jumping into that space as an architect, I'm looking at Ethereum and knowing that I can't possibly create a production level environment yet. Not yet, but I can do a lot of testing. I can do a lot of idea testing, and I can help the community grow. Every idea that comes out of that community gets documented somewhere. We've got, I don't know how big the list of tokens are available on Ethereum is now. I know there's a 1,400, so the number's pretty high. There are different direct methodologies of enacting smart contracts through Light and Web3.js and a couple of other JavaScript tools. You can build your own stacks on your own. I mean, you can have everything you need on your Mac and be working from the back of the room, right, and doing full development stuff with a fairly concentrated set of tools that's interacting with a global community. You can, and Baki and his team in Sydney, they're currently in Sydney, they're usually all over the world at hackathons. Those guys spend a lot of time poking holes at every level of this, and they literally give the information away for free. It's just an incredible community to learn from, and it's not like other communities. I come from networking and file security background. Nobody gives up what they're doing because they all want it to be their own thing. But because it's a permissionless public blockchain, which is a concept that's hard to get your head around at first, we're trying to do zero knowledge proofs. We're trying to do different ways of finding consensus, all these different methodologies around consensus, we're able to solve problems we just can't solve with classic programming alone. Because it's not programming. It's programming to a very specific outcome, a very specific dynamic outcome. Because, I liken the world of app development to making little boxes that you give away as presents, right? We wrap the box, we put some toys in the box, and it sits there on your shelf. And what we're talking about is developing children. Children that are going to interact with other children. They're going to have their own personalities. They're going to have their likes and dislikes. They're going to work well with others. They're not going to work well with others. The level of stuff that we're doing on blockchain literally has personalities at this point. Coding frameworks, outcomes, financial health, web-based stuff, trying to solve the tiniest problem, like imagine keeping your kid healthy with one vaccine, but then also making sure they graduate college with a job, right? We have to take care of all of that when we're doing development now. So it's a new world for us. We haven't even thrown AI or quantum into the mix yet. Well, there's some cool tools out. I mean, I think you can get is it a 64-bit quantum computer now? I know you can get an 18-bit or a 16-bit one. You can get access to one that IBM has, and you can start playing around with the concepts. People are worried that, you can take a quantum computer, you can point it at old blockchain data, and you can unscramble it and find out what's in those hashes. Okay, we'll give it a few years before you can do that. But are you going to be able to do it in real time?
Yeah. So,
No.
I guess for those who don't know, like quantum computing, and I'll stand corrected because I'm not an expert, solves the discrete logarithm problem very fast, or infinitely fast, which is basically what SHA-256 is predicated on. So the thinking is, will quantum computing, what will it do? Now, SHA-256 is only used in Bitcoin for proof of work mining. There's nothing to say, hey, we just can't throw a different mining algorithm into it. The signing, I don't know if curves are probably susceptible to quantum computing. I don't know. I'd say so because they're a discrete logarithm problem as well. But I'm sure we'll find another
But
signing method.
only one layer.
Yeah.
If you multiply the curves.
Yeah, exactly.
I think a good metaphor for how quantum computing will break down any encryption with typical binary systems. If I wanted to find out who has blue eyes and blonde hair in the room, I would have to ask each individual person and they would say yes or no. And that's quite time consuming because I can see everyone here. I could just have a look around, where quantum computers work in a way where I'll just yell out to everyone who has blonde hair and blue eyes, and I'll see some names pop up and I'll go, okay, that's the private key, or like that's the count.
Yeah.
I'll steal that analogy.
Good.
Well, yeah, it's shortcutting, but is it going to create a space that's going to overcome other technologies that could then secure for that? Because if you got a quantum computer unbreaking old hashes, you've got quantum computers creating new locks, right? So if we have new locks and keys, old locks and keys may open, but there's no reason we can't take all the old data and add new locks and keys to them. And I'm sitting here staring at Chris, probably going, the language of
there's a lot of post-quantum algorithms that are safe for all this stuff, all eventually we use it, so if shit happens, they'll fix it because the fix exists.
But if
Yeah.
you mix AI with that,
With AI, will screw it all again.
But it's going to be a constant battle, right? We came up with, I installed some of the first digital modems at the DoD and the Department of Energy. And when we did that, they went, oh my God, it's digital. Nobody's going to ever break into that. It was 8-bit digital. I mean, it's like, people laugh at that kind of stuff. But at the time, it was a quantum leap of technology. We were talking noises coming through the phones were amazing enough, but to actually digitize it and give it, a couple of different tones that you could add information on top of voice, it was just insane. Now we have completely encrypted packets. We have the ability for your computer, my computer, to go and ask for a set of keys, but then talk to no one else. We're only WebRTC between our two devices. So it's absolutely no middlemen. So not just middlemen in the transaction, no middlemen in the communication. We have a decentralized web that's allowing for WebRTC type interactions, there is no government that can interrupt your spoken word along with your financial transaction. That's where we're going. Now they're gonna try and bring tools to come in and sniff those things out, but that means they've got to listen to every conversation on the planet.
I disagree. They're bringing legislation, and you're already saying.
Well, yeah, okay.
Mhm.
That guns always trump logic. I agree.
And I know people will disagree with me on this, but I see regulation as absolutely imperative. And I know this goes against my own internal philosophy about why I got into the space, which is, well, I guess we all agree on. But without regulation coming into play, I don't think that's going to push forward that wave of adoption in any way. Because regulation coming into play will make it safe, legal. John will tell you all about this. The whole reason why we've been having STO type discussions and regulation discussions. It will allow the mainstream players to get into the space. It's only when the mainstream players get into the space that the general public will then be able to follow on. Until that happens, I don't think we're going to go very far very quickly. For me, regulation is unfortunately a necessary step. The bigger problem then is once you regulate, can you deregulate? And that's the one I don't have an answer for. I worry that there's going to be very, very hard to go backwards once we go down that route. But again, Trojan horse versus actually not being able to make this move on. How long more can we continue the way we are at the moment?
Yeah, so I kind of agree with you, but I think with Elastos, with our way we want to try and get adoption is through our TV boxes that we've released just after August. There's about 500 TV boxes that have been distributed now through most of China. Way of adoption is pretty much, I suppose with us, you'd be using these devices, but you don't even know that you're really using blockchain. So when people connect to the TV boxes, they're using their phone to pretty much control what's happening on their TV. One of our next developments is including IPFS into those TV boxes, so they'll be updating their firmware, so they can use that as like a personal cloud storage, where they don't even know that they're using blockchain technology in the back end. So that's just one way we think of adoption as well as Jimmy Lippin, who was or is an Ethereum developer. He's been looking into Elastos as well. He recently did a video, a YouTube video on the TV boxes, and he set up all the nodes. You can see on a map where all these nodes are set up around the world. But he's currently working on a piece of JavaScript that will be included into the browsers, I think through Chrome, maybe Firefox, where people will be using browsers as they normally do. But at the same time, that's creating an extra carrier node for Elastos, and that's also help building our network system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so just to kind of add on to that, because I think those are both really good points. One thing that I think will help with adoption is usability and a UI layer in which people don't even necessarily realize that they're using this solution. Another thing is that there's a lot of fear around the Internet of Things and just the security of operating systems with driverless cars, with things listening to us in our house. If we can ensure that that is not a problem anymore, that there are secure ways in which the Internet of Things can run. For example, a decentralized operating system named Elastos. Then that sort of helps us put collective trust into something that we know is the future if we can make it work.
For me, I'll probably say practicality. So it's kind of like what they were saying. But if you don't realize that you're really using the blockchain, I think that's great, especially people who don't understand it, and I think that's the majority. We've got these TV boxes that are set up to be nodes around the world. I think practicality is key, and I know Pratap said he's the least qualified, but I'll have to challenge him on that because I've got a marketing background, not a technical background. But from a marketing perspective, to get as many people on board, mainstream users, why not separate consensus logic with computational logic? So we can use our phones as it is. It doesn't have to change. We don't have to reinvent the wheel for everything.
I definitely agree. No one really thinks they're using the internet when they're using their phone, when they're browsing Facebook. for me to add on top of that, I think it's removing the barriers of entry so everyone can enter in the whole world, and then the education of how to use it. Because in the early days of the internet, we still had to tell our friends this is a website, this is an IP, and the easier the education gets, which is the practicality, you're only teaching them baby steps, and now they're using it, is when adoption will be at its fullest.
Yeah, adoption. We're here. I don't get this adoption argument. It's here. We're all here. I think every time you pay with a credit card, you're part of the problem. Every time you put a post on Facebook, you are part of the problem. So adoption is here. Like
We post that.
Could someone tweet
Yeah.
that?
I mean, we travel by bit. There's a coffee shop. It's 10 minutes walk. I go past 15 coffee places, but I go up there to use their service. So I'm advocating, and I'm advocating with my actions, not just right? So that is how adoption's going to happen. And all these, what they've given you there, that's the goal, but we got to get there. You get there by this feedback loop of using the services, which we're all in business, which will fund the development, which will fund the growth, which will go up. You'll take the market share from the PayPals, and you'll start using it. In Australia, you have zero excuses not to use crypto for everything. Zero. You can put everything on your credit card, and you can pay it with BPay, Living Room of Satoshi, credit card off. You can use travel by bit merchants. You have zero excuses except your own apathy. So it's incumbent on you guys to fuel adoption and stop talking about it.
Yeah, that was a goal for Central Echo's blockchain, was to switch the language up from the high level talks down to, we call it follow the yellow brick road. How do you get out of fiat onto crypto? How do you pay others? How do you pay your bills? That's like the initiation of our group. But I think the adoption, I agree with what you're saying, because that's my generation of adoption. We didn't know how to get machines networked together, so we made up bulletin boards. We made up gaming modems onto one machine so multiple people could play Doom together in the office and stuff. And then we got ArcNet, and then we got Ethernet, and then we got all these other standards.
Yeah.
When those standards come to some consensus, when we're using maybe only 30 or 40 different blockchains, and we have transport protocols to move value, and and value, I don't mean just money, but health records, work process, whatever it is. I like the mention of IPFS, being able to store valuable assets online that other people can access for a cost. That's huge, right? So once we get those protocols in a stack where people can go from what I'm considering this conversation to be the DOS modem conversation to the Mac network, where you're just almost blind and you can plug into other people, that's when we're going to get mass adoption. But I agree, the only way we're going to get there is,
I think one of the problems is, at the moment, like you mentioned, we've got so many blockchains, we've got decision paralysis.
Yeah.
We go in there, everyone's pitching their own chain. Well, you just got to ante up and pick one, and go all in, and fuel that one, and hope you've made the right choice.
Yeah. Well, the only real option is Ethereum right now, with maybe a couple of other ones to play with, and we're talking one language. There's going to be a bunch of commercial entities that want to use NEM and EOS and Ripple as their value, and a DLT instead of a true blockchain. That's going to happen. It's going to happen, but is it going to cause more of a problem or less of a problem? That's something we're going to solve. We're going to find out. It definitely is something we avoided on the health chain. We didn't go to an exchange because volatility would have killed us if we tried to stay within that marketplace. But I'm at the extreme end. I'm in the weird space. To me, there's the financial markets, trading, cryptocurrency, all of that stuff, and there's development, but blockchain architecture is kind of where I sit. I sit right in that little slot in the middle. And so, yes, the volatility of the cryptocurrency marketplace right now is scary. FUD rules.
Yeah.
But if you look at, again, what's the real problem you're trying to solve, and can you bring it down to the ground, you don't have to worry about that marketplace because you don't have to use all of it. There's enough right now to solve that problem, that problem, that problem, that problem. We got to stop theorizing and start building.
Price is a big concern. So a concrete example, I had one client, their business model, sure, when Ethereum was about $100 and a 2-cent transaction made it commercial sense. When you hit December, it was no longer commercially viable, so it actually killed the project. So it is a cause for concern.
Yeah.
I mean, the only way we offer to mitigate that is what it's like just pre-buying electricity. What makes sense? What's your OPEX cost for say 2 years? Buy enough Ethereum to cover that, so you know it's a known cost then. And that's one way to obviously mitigate it. It is a fair problem.
I think price is a direct has a direct correlation with adoption because it's supply and demand mechanisms. As more people adopt, more buying pressure. Look, for instance, with Bitcoin, as the reward gets reduced, it's just going to make the thing fly. Like that's just basic supply and demand. I look at it as one of the S-curves of technology adoption. So as something, until it gets mass adoption, it does this curve. And if you zoom in a little bit, you'll probably see like little ups and downs. Someone uses it, someone doesn't use it. Volatility will continue to be around until we get mass adoption, until we have things like stable coins, where the value doesn't actually matter. It's just the use case of it allows adoption.
But we need to be building the infrastructure in the meantime. We can't wait for the problem to happen and then be in a sudden struggle to...
Just a few years.
Just a few years. Well, I mean, there are countries that have had this problem and have solved it with cryptocurrency. You take the M-Pesa example. I don't know if people are familiar with M-Pesa, probably the first cryptocurrency or decentralized currency around. So this is in Africa, in Tanzania, Nigeria, Kenya, the M-Pesa network, which was... Am I telling people something they know? Anyone knows?
No.
So M-Pesa is phone credit, right? It was Vodafone that went into Africa and they started up this network. It was called the M-Pesa network. And M-Pesa was phone credit that people would buy. After a while, when inflation was so high and no one could trust your regular currency anymore, people found that the one thing that was constant was phone credit, because 30 minutes of phone credit is 30 minutes of phone credit, no matter what happens to the local currency. So people started trading instead on M-Pesa. You would go to the market and you'd pull out your little, $5 mobile phone, and you would text the other person whatever value in M-Pesa, and that person then received it instantly. It completely bypassed the traditional financial system. At one point, 70% of the GDP of Kenya, if I remember correctly, was passing through the M-Pesa network. This is way before Bitcoin. Way
because
before.
it was Vodafone, that financial framework was actually outside the country.
Exactly, it was outside the country. They had a problem, and I mean, necessity is the mother of all invention, right? So they had a problem, and this came up. It was just a lucky thing that there was some innovative guy who went, hey, phone credit, and then people got on. But the infrastructure was there to some extent, and it was centralized infrastructure, but was able to operate in a decentralized manner because that centralized infrastructure didn't have direct control over the economics of the model. It was lucky. We now are in a situation where we can build up the infrastructure for when the problem happens. But to go back to the question, yeah, the volatility is making a big problem. There's a big problem with getting the infrastructure up. Think of a lot of projects that successfully ICO'd, and then halted after. Good projects that can't get off the ground because they raised $30 million of Ethereum when Ethereum was $1,000. And no one wanted to sell. I mean, I ran a brokerage. We had conversations with a lot of these guys going, should we liquidate some of it? Should we liquidate? Why would you? Right? When it's going up the way it is, no one wanted to liquidate. Now your $30 million is worth $4. How are you going to get your project off the ground? And great projects, which would have built great infrastructure that's necessary, which haven't been able to get off the ground and now may not ever be able to get off the ground because of the volatility. And as long as we have a market with a very small market capital, which is still value-wise predominantly, unfortunately, centralized, we're still going to be culpable to such massive market shifts. Also, it's going to be a problem.
I think, and I totally agree with you as well, Prasad. This idea of like getting the infrastructure ready for real problems, and that goes beyond crypto, and we have to think about that as well. Like, for example, a real problem we have now is that people drive cars into people, and that's not okay. But imagine if they had the ability to not be in the car, but instead could harness the power of technology to basically attack people with driverless cars, a whole fleet of them. Like, the scale of that is terrifying and intense, and that's a real problem we have right now. We're not at the point where people are harnessing the Internet of Things to hurt other people yet, but it's so important to think about all of the use cases which pose a threat right now and could pose an even greater threat as technology is advancing and go beyond just, it's nice to be wealthy. It's also nice to just have money, but it's even nicer to be alive. And these are really big problems that we should be looking into as well.
Maybe on that note, unless there's anything.
Just because we're talking about platforms and blockchains, this last week or so, the fortnight has been dominated by blockchains fighting with other blockchains, And I know I know the tech community gets very involved in this, and I can understand why you're passionate about what it is. But from the outside, we sound like kids. We sound like kids fighting within ourselves, and it only makes it. And we've got enough problems trying to convince the world outside of our legitimacy. The infighting, like we look like rank amateurs. It's really not helping, and to have that perpetuated from within the community, I've heard a few discussions like that going on already, and I know these are happening, but we need to remind ourselves that we're not helping ourselves in any way. We're shooting ourselves in the foot, and it's easy to say, can we just get along? But can we just get along?
Yeah,
Not so much in the dev community.
Well, no, it is true. I mean, to circle back, it is a valid point, and it's probably based on human nature that most forks come because of software discrepancies. One, with engineering, there's always a trade-off. There's no right answer. There's always a trade-off, and developers have to choose which is the better trade-off. So with this technology, if you don't like it, you just create a fork, and you like an election, you then advocate your branch. But then that's fine. That's beautiful. That's the way this thing will evolve. What Caleb's talking about is the way we should interact. Don't have these baby Twitter wars. Just vote with your feet. If you don't like that technology, don't use it or make a pull request.
There's ways also we can collaborate even with a fork. So Loki, which is a project I'm working on, is a code fork of Monero, and we're actually in talks of Monero's got a research lab, and they've been spending their Monero to hire researchers to help with quantum resistance and other things like ring signatures. Loki is in conversation with them now, and we're going to start paying their research lab as well, because we've both got the same base code. The problems that they solve also help us.
Yeah, we saw that with Bitcoin Cash. There was a bug in one of the codes that got pulled into the other one.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's good. More forks, you get more innovation, and we'll see which one happens.
And you're getting more eyeballs on the problem more acutely, because when you're forking because of the specific